Well, before the interview started, you had kind of an interesting story that about the discrimination that you faced trying to join. Which club was it? The boys'
The
club.
boys
The
club,
Fort Worth
yeah.
Boys Club at that
Hmm.
time.
Can you tell that story for the interview?
Well, yeah, they my friends that live there on Ellis Street, which is on the other side of Maine, is I guess you would say west of Maine, and they joined, and so I was about 12 years old, and I went over there to try to join, and they just kept telling me, no, we haven't been approved and all this kind of stuff, and I kept going back, why can't I join? Because you just signed a little application on your address, and they gave you a card, and every time you went in, you signed in. But they wouldn't let me join, and I told my dad about it. And my dad went up there and talked to him, and they said, well, no, he hasn't been approved. I said, well, why? Why hasn't he been approved? And they finally got to it to where they said that we lived on the other side of Main Street, and so that's why I couldn't join. So, the boys club is sponsored by the United Way. So they went and spoke to the United Way, and the United Way came over there, and they thought, yeah, you have to let him join. So I joined the boys club.
Mm-hmm.
But and I don't know if it was discrimination, but I remember being at a Catholic school where we're all Hispanic, and we all spoke Spanish and English and all that. 'Cause we had nuns for teachers. But I went to Elder in the 7th grade, and they assigned me to a homeroom, and the speaker comes on, and it says all Mexican Americans, to go to the auditorium. And I'm sitting there thinking, Mexican American, I never had been called a Mexican American. And the teacher said, you need to go to the auditorium. I said, I do? He said, yeah, you need to go to the auditorium. So I went to the auditorium. And the first thing the principal did, vice principal, Mr. Lewis, I believe his name was, said, welcome us to the school and all this kind of stuff. But then he said you were not to speak any Spanish on the grounds at all. You can be expelled for speaking Spanish anywhere on the grounds, And I thought, well, I used to communicate with all my friends as half Spanish, half English, just the way we spoke.
We'll still do like la water heater.
And so, but that's the first thing you told me. You said you weren't. It's the first thing you told all of us. You're not to speak any Spanish on the grounds. And this was probably 1958 or 9. Nothing. You can speak no Spanish on the ground.
And about how old were you?
I was about 13.
Okay.
Something like that.
Do you remember a similar instance where you were told not to speak Spanish? Or?
We were always told not to speak Spanish. I mean, when we were in, I remember when I was in, I don't recall that happened at Elder, which he and I are just a year apart.
I never did have that
but when I was in high school, they didn't want us to speak Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
But you got to remember also that back then the Hispanic population in the schools was not anywhere close to what it is now. Now predominantly Hispanic. Well, the Hispanic population is the largest population in the country now,
Mm-hmm.
per se, and so back then it wasn't. So we didn't, so they didn't want us to speak, Spanish, and so I don't. Yet you could take Spanish classes and to learn Spanish,
okay.
and that was okay, But of course, we didn't think about that then. You were young, and they just said, "Don't do it," and you did it,
I told my kids I took Spanish and I flunked it. And they said, "Grandma, I said it's hard. It was hard, because it's when you speak it that you learn. You grew up with it.
You grew up speaking a Tex-Mex, which is I learned to speak Spanish a lot more correctly because I worked some people from Mexico, and I would ask them to correct me because I didn't. The Spanish that we spoke was, everybody would call it Tex-Mex because you mixed a lot of words that they were just made up. They
They were half English and half Spanish, I guess,